love could morph into a silent battleground. But as I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the empty space where Daniel used to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder where it all went wrong. My name is Elizabeth Martin, a 35-year-old marketing specialist, and I was married to Daniel Thompson, a nurse in geriatric care. Our story wasn't one of those fiery romances you read about. It was more subtle, like a slow-burning candle that you don't realize is dwindling until it's almost out. We met in high school, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. I remember the day he walked into our classroom, a new transfer student with an awkward smile and a notebook always clutched tightly under his arm. "Hey, I'm Daniel," he had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Elizabeth. Welcome to Jefferson High," I replied, trying to offer a friendly smile. Those high school days were simple. We'd talk about everything and nothing, our conversations filled with dreams and adolescent musings. But even then, there were signs, tiny glimpses of the man Daniel would become. After high school, we drifted into the natural progression of life: jobs, responsibilities, and eventually marriage. It felt right at the time, like the next logical step in our journey. But as the years passed, the man I thought I knew started to fade away, replaced by someone distant and self-absorbed. I remember one evening, the setting sun casting a golden hue over our living room, when I attempted to breach the growing silence between us. "Daniel, do you think we could talk? It feels like we're drifting apart," I said, my voice tinged with hope. He barely looked up from his phone, his attention elsewhere. "Elizabeth, I'm tired. Can we not do this now?" That was Daniel, always deflecting, always avoiding. It was like living with a ghost, a reminder of what used to be, but never quite there. The realization that I was more alone in my marriage than I ever was, single, hit me like a ton of bricks. I longed for the old Daniel, the one who laughed at my jokes and looked at me like I was the only person in the room. But that Daniel was long gone, and in his place was a stranger wearing his face. As I lay there, the night slowly creeping in, I made a decision. It was time to find my happiness, even if it meant walking away from the man I once loved. It was a thought that scared me, yet at the same time, it felt like the only way forward. I didn't know it then, but this decision would set me on a path I never expected, one where the past and present would collide in ways I could never have imagined. Sitting in the dim light of our kitchen, the silence was more than just an absence of sound. It was a presence, a weight that filled the room. I sipped my coffee, pondering over the chasm that had grown between Daniel and me. It was a divide that seemed to widen with each passing day, a silent testament to the neglected corners of our marriage. I often found myself replaying our conversations, or rather, the lack thereof. Daniel's responses had become monosyllabic, his attention perpetually elsewhere. It was as if he had built a wall around himself, one I couldn't penetrate no matter how hard I tried. "Is there anything you want to talk about, Daniel? Anything at all?" I asked one evening as we sat at opposite ends of the dining table, our meals untouched and growing cold. He shrugged, his eyes never leaving his plate. "Not really, Elizabeth. It's just work stuff, you know." But I knew it wasn't just work. There was something more, something he wasn't telling me. It was in the way he avoided my gaze, in the hurried manner he left for work each morning, and in the empty space that had grown in our bed. The loneliness was palpable, a constant companion in the quiet moments of our life together. I missed the laughter, the shared glances, the warmth of a conversation that didn't feel like pulling teeth. I longed for a connection, for any sign that Daniel still saw me, that he still cared. It was during one of those long nights where sleep felt like a distant dream that I realized I couldn't continue living like this. I couldn't be the only one trying to bridge the gap, the only one fighting for a marriage that felt like it had ended long ago. "Daniel, we need to talk. This isn't working," I said one morning, the words spilling out before I could stop them. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I mean us, Daniel. We're like strangers living under the same roof. I can't do this anymore." His reaction was one of indifference, a shrug that felt like a slap in the face. "If that's what you want, Elizabeth." It wasn't what I wanted, not really. What I wanted was for us to go back to the way things were, to find our way back to each other. But some things, once lost, can never be found again. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew that my decision to leave was the right one. But it didn't make it any less painful. The realization that my marriage was over, that the man I had loved was now little more than a stranger, was a bitter pill to swallow. But swallow it I did, because I knew that staying would only prolong the inevitable. It was time to find my own path, to rediscover the woman I had lost somewhere along the way. It was time to start anew. The cafe was bustling with the morning rush, but in the corner booth, away from the chaos, it felt like a different world. I stirred my coffee absent-mindedly, waiting for Alex Carter to arrive. He was more than just a childhood friend. He was a therapist, someone who had always offered a listening ear and a thoughtful perspective. As Alex walked in, his presence was like a breath of fresh air. He hadn't changed much since our high school days, still the same kind-hearted, insightful person I remembered. "Elizabeth, it's been too long," he greeted, his smile genuine. "How have you been?" I hesitated, my words tangling up. "Not great, Alex. Things with Daniel have been difficult." He nodded, his expression turning serious. "What's going on?" I poured out everything, the silence, the distance, the feeling of living with a stranger. Alex listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. "It sounds like you're both living in a state of limbo," he observed after I finished. "Stuck in a pattern that's not healthy for either of you. I just don't know what to do anymore," I admitted, feeling a sense of relief at being able to share my burdens. Alex leaned forward, his tone gentle yet firm. "Sometimes, Elizabeth, the hardest decisions are the ones that lead us to where we need to be. It's okay to choose your own happiness." His words struck a chord in me. It wasn't just about leaving Daniel, it was about finding myself again, reclaiming the parts of me that had been lost in the shadows of a failing marriage. "But what if I'm making a mistake?" I asked, the fear of the unknown gnawing at me. "Life is a series of choices, Elizabeth. Not all of them are easy, but they're necessary for growth. You deserve to be happy, to be heard, to be loved in the way you need." His assurance was comforting, a lighthouse in the stormy seas of my doubts. As we continued talking, I felt a sense of clarity beginning to form. Alex's perspective, both as a friend and a therapist, provided a balance I desperately needed. Leaving the cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and changes, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could find my way through this. The day that marked the turning point in my life began like any other. Daniel was his usual detached self, immersed in his phone as he ate his breakfast. I had spent the night mulling over my conversation with Alex, and I knew I had to take the first step towards change. As I was about to leave for work, Daniel's voice stopped me. "Elizabeth, we need to talk about something important." Surprised by his sudden initiative, I turned around. "What is it?" "It's about my parents," he started, not meeting my eyes. "They're getting older, and they need someone to look after them. I think you should." I waited for him to finish, but I could already feel my heart sinking. "You should start taking care of them," he concluded. I was speechless. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. "Daniel, are you saying you want me to give up my job to take care of your parents?" He shrugged, as if it was the most natural request in the world. "Jeff, it would really help me out. I'm swamped with work, and you know how it is with my shifts." The realization hit me hard. Not only did Daniel not see or hear me, but he also expected me to put my life on hold for his convenience. It was a moment of stark clarity. I was not in a partnership. I was in a one-sided arrangement where my needs and desires were invisible. "Daniel, I can't do that. I have my own career, my own life," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked up, surprised by my refusal. "But you're my wife. It's what you should do." That statement, so full of entitlement and disregard for me as a person, was the last straw. "No, Daniel, I'm your wife, not your caretaker or your employee. I deserve to be treated as an equal, and if you can't see that, then maybe this marriage isn't what I thought it was." The look on his face was a mix of confusion and irritation. It was clear he hadn't expected me to stand up for myself. "I think we need to reconsider this marriage," I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. Daniel didn't respond. He just stared at me, as if trying to figure out who I was. but in that moment I realized that I was no longer afraid of the unknown. I was more afraid of spending the rest of my life feeling unseen and unheard. As I left the house that day, I knew that things would never be the same again. I was on a path to reclaiming my life, and though I didn't know where it would lead, I was ready to find out. The day I decided to consult a divorce attorney was filled with a mix of dread and determination. I knew that taking this step would irrevocably change my life, but the growing chasm between Daniel and me left me with no other choice. Sitting across from the attorney, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. Here was someone who was ready to listen to my side of the story, to help me navigate the complex maze of ending a marriage. As you know, divorces can be complicated, especially when it comes to matters like assets and alimony, the attorney said, her eyes scanning the documents I had brought. I understand, I replied. But it's not just about the legalities. There's more going on, and I need to know where I stand. As we delved deeper into the discussion, a picture began to emerge, one that painted Daniel in a very different light than the man I thought I had married. His frequent late nights, his secretive phone calls, and his sudden need for me to take care of his parents, it all started to make sense in a most disturbing way. The attorney paused, looking up from her notes. Elizabeth, based on what you've shared and the evidence we've gathered, it seems that Daniel has been less than faithful. The words hit me like a tidal wave. Infidelity had never crossed my mind, but the pieces fit together too well to ignore. I had no idea, I stammered, feeling a mix of shock and betrayal. It's not uncommon in situations like yours, the attorney continued sympathetically, but it does change the dynamics of the divorce proceedings. As I left her office, my mind was reeling. The betrayal stung, but there was also a sense of vindication. Daniel's actions were catching up to him, a reflection of the natural consequences of his choices. Over the next few days, as I processed this new reality, a part of me felt relieved. The doubts and insecurities that had plagued me were now replaced with a clear understanding of the situation. Daniel's deceit had unraveled, and with it, the last threads of our marriage. But it wasn't a victory. The end of a marriage, no matter how troubled, is always a loss of dreams, of shared memories, of a life once envisioned together. As I grappled with these emotions, I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but it was a path I had to walk to find my own truth and peace. The day of our crucial meeting, the air was thick with tension. Daniel, Alex, the attorney, and I sat in the stark conference room, an unspoken understanding hanging over us. This was more than just a legal proceeding. It was the culmination of years of unaddressed issues and buried resentments. Daniel's eyes flickered with a mix of defiance and apprehension as the attorney laid out the facts. His infidelities, his deception about his family's situation, and his negligence towards our marriage were all laid bare. Daniel, you need to understand the seriousness of your actions, the attorney said, her tone firm yet fair. Your behavior has consequences, legal and emotional. I watched Daniel closely, searching for any sign of remorse or understanding. But his expression was unreadable, a mask that hid whatever thoughts or feelings he might have been harboring. As the attorney continued to outline the potential outcomes of the divorce, I couldn't help but feel a sense of surrealism. This was not how I had imagined my life would unfold. The man I had loved and trusted was now a stranger, his actions the catalyst for our unraveling marriage. But amidst the chaos of emotions, there was also a sense of liberation. The truth was out in the open, and with it came a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The path to divorce, though fraught with challenges, was now clear. Elizabeth, what are your thoughts? Alex asked, his voice pulling me back to the present. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I just want to move on, to close this chapter of my life and start anew. I don't wish Daniel any harm, but I also can't ignore what he's done. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was a flicker of something in his gaze. Was it regret? Shame? I couldn't tell. And in that moment, I realized it didn't matter. What mattered was taking control of my life again, of stepping out of the shadows of a failed marriage and into the light of my own future. As the meeting concluded, with terms and conditions laid out, Daniel finally spoke. I never meant for any of this to happen, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. His apology, though late, was a small balm to the wounds of our shared past. But it was not enough to change the course we were on. Our paths had diverged, and it was time to accept that and move forward. Walking out of that room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it was mine to take. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The days following the decisive meeting were a blur of emotions and paperwork, but amidst the chaos, there was a budding sense of hope. The finalization of the divorce was not just the end of my marriage to Daniel, it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. As I sat in the quiet of my new apartment, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, I realized that, for the first time in years, I was truly on my own. It was both daunting and exhilarating. The freedom to make my own choices, to live my life on my terms, was a newfound treasure. I thought about Daniel occasionally, wondering how he was coping with the aftermath of our divorce. There was no anger or bitterness left in me, only a wish that he would find his own path to happiness and fulfillment. Alex had been a constant support through it all, offering not just his professional guidance, but also the comfort of a friendship that had stood the test of time. Our conversations, once filled with the troubles of my failing marriage, now turned to discussions about the future. One evening, over coffee at our favorite cafe, Alex asked, "So what's next for Elizabeth Martin?" I smiled, feeling a sense of peace. "A lot of things, Alex. I want to focus on my career, maybe take up a hobby or two, and just live, you know?" He nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. "That sounds perfect. You deserve every bit of happiness and success, Elizabeth." The journey had not been easy, but it had led me to a place of self-discovery and resilience. I had learned the importance of standing up for myself, of voicing my needs and desires, and of not settling for anything less than what I deserved. As I unpacked my things, placing books on shelves and hanging pictures on the walls, I realized that this was more than just setting up a new home. It was a symbolic act of reclaiming my space, my life, my identity. The future was unwritten, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with new experiences, challenges, and joys. And as I looked out of my window at the city lights twinkling in the distance, I knew that whatever lay ahead, I was ready for it. I had walked through the fire and emerged stronger, more self-aware, and more determined than ever to live a life filled with purpose and joy. This was not just an end, but a beautiful new beginning.